My name is Grazia Vittadini. I am a dual Italian and German national. And how would I define myself? Definitely, I think, as an engineer. It wasn't straightforward from the beginning. There were a couple of zigzags to take me there. What I knew is that I loved airplanes, I loved music, art, ballet, and this all brought me to just embracing a journey in engineering, starting from being a subcontractor up to becoming the first woman ever on certain executive boards, without really having planned that to begin with. I've always been driven by having the idea of having an impact, the will to have an impact, to change things for the better, driven by the idea that if I do something, I do it because I'm serving a higher purpose, something which is bigger than just myself. Having a taste for excellence, I like doing things well, and with a very strong idea of integrity. And I'm not just talking about the ethical component of it, but also the intellectual, being true to yourself, not bending to what the rest of the world may be telling you should be doing or expecting from you. Yes, and so this is me.
So Grazia, just so we can really impress our audience with your CV, what's your title today as it stands?
I have the privilege of serving Rolls-Royce as Chief Technology Officer. So I'm the CTO of Rolls-Royce since 1 year, pretty much exactly, because I started on the 2nd of December last year. After 20 years at Airbus, the last 3 of which also saw me serving as CTO.
Now, we met at Farnborough Air Show, and we happened to just completely bump into each other. I think we were staying at the same hotel or something like that. And I must say that you struck me as someone who is so unconventionally not looking like an engineer. You're gorgeous, you're glamorous, and you have this absolute sparkle in your eyes. And, you know, that's not what people think about when they think of a typical engineer. And so immediately, just on first impressions, I was absolutely dying to speak with you and kind of know about your life and your journey into engineering. And there's so much ground to cover. And it's so funny that you didn't start your introduction with, I'm the CTO of Rolls-Royce, which is so impressive. It was more of a personal description. So I don't know where to start. I think let's get the technical stuff out of the way. So what does being a CTO involve at Rolls-Royce?
It involves basically, it's a quite daunting task, which requires to constantly scan the horizon for any technologies which could be pertinent to the products of Rolls-Royce. And we're not talking about luxury cars, we're talking about power generation, mainly on engines for aircraft, right? That's the core of the Rolls-Royce business, plus stationary power generation, plus small modular reactors and other things, but aviation is the core. So technologies which could take our existing products to the next level in terms of efficiency, performance, or disrupt our own offering, right? And so identifying these technologies and making sure that either in Rolls-Royce or through partnerships, collaborations, we mature these technologies and then implement them into our products, or perhaps develop products in adjacent markets or services related to our products. So it's that type of look ahead, looking at time horizons which go from 2, 3, 5 years to, you know, when we think about, for instance, quantum technologies, 20 years plus.
So are you always searching for new innovations, new ideas, that kind of thing?
Absolutely. Plus, of course, making sure that whatever we have identified and are working on matures according to certain plans, milestones, that we test any new development before we put it into our products, because in aviation, safety comes first always, and it's absolutely important that we're very rigorous in the validation of these technologies before we fly with them, right? So yes, it's both a very forward-looking type of attitude and mindset you have to have, and very rigorous technical approach to maturing ideas, so that, again, they can allow us to fly safely.
Yeah, I mean, aviation seems like such a complex, I mean, just the very notion that we managed to lift like the equivalent of 50 African elephants into the sky just blows my mind. Studying it blew my mind even further, because it's like, wow, these mathematical equations that we're learning here is what keeps those planes aloft. And there's so much that needs to be right. I mean, the tiniest details can change a situation. Is your job really stressful? Like, having that kind of responsibility for people's safety?
Well, it's definitely something, you know, you have to buy into, and when you embrace a career in aviation, because it's even a parameter, you know, which affects competitiveness, in the sense that there's a non-written rule that you don't compete on safety. So there are different fora where companies interact even with market competitors on safety issues, just to make sure that when it comes to safety, we're all on the same page, because this is something so fundamentally important. So it's very much implicit into the discipline. So when you enter in aviation, it's an incredible responsibility, definitely, but it's also so rewarding when you see airplanes taking off for the very first time on their first flight, after having worked on a component or a section. You know, it's absolutely an incredible feeling, which is very difficult to describe, and incredibly emotional.
Yeah, I can imagine. I get emotional just seeing planes take off generally. So that must just be so overwhelming. And there's so many technical things I want to ask you, but I only have an hour with you. So I guess I'll ask one burning technical question, and then we'll get on to learning more about you. We met again after our hotel coincidence at the Farnborough Air Show Aerospace section of the show, which is brand new, and I think it really shows where aviation is heading. It's going higher, essentially. And there was a lot of discussion about SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, and, you know, this push towards sustainable aviation and climate change and all the things that aviation can do to mitigate their effects on global warming. It's a massive discussion, and I'm sure we could get together for 3 days and still not have gone too deep, because it's such a complex subject. But do we have this to look forward to in the short to medium term? Like, because I got the sense that clearly SAF is an important part of making aviation sustainable, but there's a lot to do before we are actually flying on sustainable fuels. So where are we?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question indeed, because, you know, the pandemic has shown this, I believe, more than ever, how essential aviation is. You know, we were all confined, and what was flying? Freighter aircraft transporting vaccines, medical equipment across the planet. And now that, you know, we are more in an endemic phase of the virus, we see people cannot wait to get back on a plane and reconnect with friends, families all across the world. So aviation is a force for good and is absolutely essential. And it is also it has a fundamental responsibility of reducing its carbon footprint. And decarbonizing aviation is one of the toughest challenges. It's an industry which is very, very difficult to tackle. And we're responsible for roughly 2.5% of global CO2 emissions. So SAF is definitely sustainable. The development of sustainable aviation fuel and the use of sustainable aviation fuels is definitely a fundamental component of that path to carbon neutrality, to net zero by 2050. And we as a company at Rolls-Royce have subscribed the UN Race to Zero. So we have a very strong commitment in that sense. It's not the only solution, because the challenge is so wide that we really need to keep our minds open and continue working on existing technologies and products, continuing to make our engines more and more efficient, because that will mean we will burn less kerosene or synthetic fuel, and every single drop counts. So the continuous efficiency of our products is a fundamental ingredient. Sustainable aviation fuel is another one, where currently all what we can fly with, because there's nothing else available on the market, are biofuels. Now, biofuels, which can be made out of different feedstock, are tricky, because you need to take care, you know, that by using biofuels, you're not competing with arable land. You're not using whatever your feedstock is. If you're growing stuff, that you're not using drinkable water to have that type of feedstock, right? Because then it's not sustainable as a whole either. And currently, there's enough biofuel to support just, I think, 0.1% to satisfy 0.1% of the total aviation demand. So that's really very symbolic. Now, all engines and all airframes are already certified today to fly with at least 50% sustainable fuels, a blend of at least for 50%. So we're well underway to demonstrate that we can fly with up to 100% sustainable aviation fuel. And by doing so, if instead of using biofuels, we would go to synthetic fuels, we could reduce our global emissions by even up to 80%. Why this? Because sustainable aviation fuel in a synthetic form rather than in a biofuel form requires, for it to be really sustainable, CO2 to be extracted from the atmosphere, combined with green hydrogen, and then synthesized. So, and then you have a virtuous circle, right? You emit CO2, which then you recover. And that's why at Rolls-Royce, we are engaged on, indeed, developing a direct air carbon capture solution in partnership with different research institutes to enable that virtuous circle to kick in. And there's other ways, of course, other routes we're exploring to get to net zero beyond improving the efficiency of our products and demonstrating that we can fly with 100% sustainable aviation fuel. We're exploring more disruptive technology solutions such as electrification of flight or the use of hydrogen, for instance, which could really virtually take us to even emitting zero CO2 emission. So these are the different routes we need to continue exploring to get to net zero.
There's so many different routes, and there's so many. What struck me about the talks and seminars and panel discussions that you were part of was that there's so much that needs to advance. It's not just, okay, we switch fuel and let's find a new fuel. It's like the infrastructure to get that fuel to airports. And, you know, there's just so much that goes on behind the scenes that I think many of us don't really appreciate as existing. You know, we just don't have a knowledge of it. And I think there is so much to discuss, and I'm going to advise anyone that really wants to learn more to definitely check out Rolls-Royce website, because there's lots of information out there on the technicalities of all the things that you're doing at Rolls-Royce, and it is really fascinating and it is really cutting edge. But I really want to get into the nitty-gritty of your personal journey into engineering, because as a woman in engineering, first of all, you're very rare, but you really don't come across as that stereotypical, even woman in engineering. And it's so inspiring to see you in such a senior position with such a glow about you. And I kind of, let's go from the beginning. Like, when did you realize that a career in engineering or even aviation, if you had that kind of specific knowledge of what you want to do, when did it start?
Well, you know, from a very early age, I was totally fascinated by all things that fly. I was really drawn to aviation. The legend says that, you know, my very first words after in Italian, mamma, which is mother, papa, which can be both food and daddy. My third word allegedly was aeroplano, which is airplane in Italian. Because from my pram, I'd be following these wonderful machines in the sky. So there's probably something, there's some element of curiosity, which then brought me as a child to spend a lot of time building models, airplane models out of balsa wood or out of, you know, the standard boxes. So yes, but the fact is that in parallel, I was exposed to, I had an education, a basic education, going to gymnasium in Italy, more, let's say, in the liberal arts, right? So music, philosophy, Latin, ancient Greek, arts. And I grew up, my dad is an engineer, my mom is a mathematician, but, you know, I grew up in a household full of music, of love for the arts. I have 30 years of ballet in under my belt. I studied music I have a classical percussionist background. And so that's the zigzag I was referring to before, right? And at the same time, I loved airplanes. I loved motorcycles. I had a motorcycle. I kept on, dismantling and rebuilding and optimizing and fine tuning and so on and so forth. And actually, I wanted to be a jet fighter pilot. At that time, the Italian Air Force didn't allow women to fly, right? I applied nonetheless. Of course, I was rejected, and that made me so angry. I found that so unfair. And basically, I said to myself, you know what? If I can fly them well, then I'm going to build them. And that's what brought me to aeronautical engineering at the Politecnico in Milano, and then to specializing in aerodynamics, which is my specialty, even if I've always then worked more in the structural field. And that's also what brought me to leave my country at some point 30 years ago, because it was very important for me to continue working as an engineer in that industry. And so I followed the professional opportunities which presented itself to me. And after 2 years in Italy, working on the Eurofighter project, I left for Germany. And then between Germany, France, with teams in Spain, in the UK, in the United States, as well as in China, in India, I've been around a lot, and I never really came back to the nest, always pursuing that passion and the love for what I do.
How did you deal with the language barriers?
Oh, that's an interesting one, Shini, because indeed, when I left Italy, I was supposed to go to Paris and work as a subcontractor for a company which was building their next business jet. Now, a week before leaving Italy, the subcontracting company called me saying that at the end, unfortunately, they did not get the contract in Paris. And so, how about Monaco? Now, Monaco in Italian can be two very different places, one on the sea in France, in the south of France, and the other is Munich in Bavaria. So I said, wait a minute, what do I need to pack? My swimming suit or my ski suit? And it was the latter. And I was really scared because I couldn't speak a word of German. I had, some preconceived ideas about how Germans are and what they eat, and so
German.
I took a second passport and second citizenship. It's about a couple of years ago. But at that time, I knew nothing of Germany. And so I just basically told myself, Grazia, you hang on in there, you resist at least 3 months. You need to stay there minimum 3 months. And then if you don't like it, if it doesn't work, you can always go back. And voila, now fast forward 30 years, I still haven't gone back to where I started, right? And learning German was difficult, but 6 months.
French as well?
Mais oui. But it's easier. French is easier. French and Spanish are easier because, when you have Italian, it doesn't take much to become fluent.
Italian, French, Spanish, German, English, 5 languages, an expert in aerodynamics. There's probably a million other things, but that alone is highly impressive and amazing. It's really interesting that you went to Germany, because I see it as a country that is very engineering led. And I'm assuming that women in engineering in Germany are actually accepted more than maybe anywhere else in Europe.
It depends very much on, I guess, well, I can speak for, of course, aerospace engineering. It depends also from the region. Unfortunately, from the societal perspective, especially in the south of Germany, I have the impression that there's an expectation on women that they must choose whether having, they have a career or they become mothers. And so I certainly see many colleagues, awesome engineers, having problems with that, being confronted with that type of expectation, which is absolutely, nonsense. You need to find whatever works for you. And I've had experiences in my journey where, I put part-time mothers in leadership positions. And that created an uproar, people saying, colleagues saying, oh my gosh, but she's not in the office on Wednesdays. I said, yeah, well, don't put meetings on Wednesdays because decisions will not be taken because she's not in. So, and I always found it so amazing. There's not many of us. We are a minority still. The industry is male dominated. We sail around a 20% presence, which becomes smaller the higher you go in the hierarchy of companies. And it is so refreshing when you have the privilege of working with other women engineers, because I don't know, there are some common denominators. And I don't want to go into cliches, but more pragmatism, less need of demonstrating how clever and brilliant you are, no territory marking. So I really get things done better in a more efficient, smarter way when I have the privilege of doing so with women.
Did you ever choose motherhood?
I did not, because it never, I don't know, the conditions weren't there, in the sense of, I come from a very traditional family, and I never had that maternal instinct, which would have brought me to wanting to seek motherhood, even on my own or independently from having a partner. And I never got to that. When I found my better half, it's not long ago, 5 years ago, and he has 2 wonderful children. So yes, it never got to me, and never, the circumstances, were not there. But whenever thinking about the topic and what to do in order to also create in corporate systems the conditions for women to thrive and grow, rather than thinking about children, I think about mothers, because I have a mother, and focusing on mothers perhaps makes the topic addressable also for a larger percentage of the men, of the men population, since everybody has a mother, right? Or at least 99.9% of human beings have a mother, and rightly or not, and it's definitely not right and not fair, but in certain cultures or minds, children are still considered a woman topic, right? So if you shift to mothers and talk about mothers, let's make conditions good, viable for mothers. I think you tackle a wider slice of the population and embark them on the journey, yeah, to making this world a fairer place.
I mean, Grazia, I've got goosebumps listening to you because, well, I had goosebumps when you said that you did ballet, because that's also been my story. I'm like, oh my gosh, I totally relate. But now the goosebumps are even more prominent because I also share your experience with the motherhood dilemma. I come from a very traditional Southeast Asian family, but my parents have been together, what would it be now, 47 years, 48 years, and that's what I grew up with. I just grew up with that kind of template, and then on the other side I also had this really massive ambition to pursue my engineering curiosities and education, career ambition, like all of that was so important. And I was like, when am I meant to fit in motherhood, and do I even have a maternal instinct? And I love engineering, and that's very masculine. And so there's a lot of things to not unravel, but just kind of detangle. And it's just so beautiful to hear a woman who is so senior in engineering supporting mothers when you are not a mother, because it's exactly why we need diverse engineering teams, because you bring a perspective that cares about, 50% of the population that often gets overlooked, even if you don't have the same experience of being a mother yourself. And, this is why change happens, because you get that rare perspective and you let part-time mothers and brilliant engineers, thrive. And those decisions aren't made on a Wednesday when they're not there, but they will be made, and you're giving them the trust and the agency to still, because all the mothers I've met who were engineers, are engineers, and even just also women in STEM, they loved their career before they became mothers. And then when they're mothers, suddenly their purpose for life changes and deepens. And then they want to go back to the workforce even more determined, with this renewed sense of purpose. And, they bring so much more to the table, even if their time is limited. And you're celebrating that, you're acknowledging that, and you're giving women that chance. We never talk about returners. We never talk about people who have had to take a break for COVID or motherhood or whatever the reason is. And all of the things that come with that, which is like a major drop in self-confidence. And, so you championing these women is just so, so wonderful. And I thank you for doing that, because I actually haven't had a conversation with a woman who said that the circumstances weren't right, and it's left me, you're a massive role model to me, because it's always left me thinking, did I majorly screw up in life that I haven't added motherhood onto the whole list of things that I've done. And I see you thriving and helping because there are women out there that were born to be mothers. And there are women like us who are making massive change and not mothers. And we're still as important to society. And I see that in you. And I hope that one day I can give myself that kind of acknowledgement. But I really see it in you because, I mean, the world needs you. So
the world needs us. I think it's our duty to build the conditions, the bridges that will enable other forms of womanship, to have a voice around the table and to belong. So it's definitely a mission I have, and it's great because nobody's giving it to me. So it's really a self-given purpose and mission, which is absolutely one of my top priorities.
And how have you dealt with being such a, alpha female? I'm sure when you walk into a room, like heads turn just because of the way you look before you've even said anything and show your expertise. Like, how have you dealt with, because I'm starting to realize that, as women, ambitious women, we kind of want to be the best on all levels. And actually, in a very male-dominated world, being the best can sometimes hold you back because you're intimidating. And you can bring out insecurities in people because of your qualities. Like, how have you dealt with that?
Oh gosh, this is there's so much to this, Sheenie. We could go on, I think, for hours on the topic. Well, listen, first principle, always, and I had to learn this, is not to take things personally. When you see reactions around you and you are a minority, don't take it personally, because most of the times it's not done or meant with ill intent. It's just that you are rare. There's not many of you like you are. And this triggers reactions. Now, what I've observed, especially in earlier phases of my journey, is that colleagues would tend to put me either in the daughter category. Oh, let me tell you how this works, darling. Or in, the flirty type of mother, wife, or partner type of category, or mommy. I'm not happy. I need this. I need that. The world is so unfair. Always complaining for no reason. Why? Because these colleagues probably never had peers like me, right? And therefore develop coping mechanisms and try to package me in different categories. So a lot of what happens around you needs to be, again, put in a certain perspective and without letting it affect you as a person too much. Another thing which I had to deal with, and it could have derailed me, I think, is feedback. In an industry where the incumbent template is male, pale, Yale, you know, anything which is different is treated as something which should be fitting in that template, right? Rather than acknowledging you for, you know, whatever it is that you bring to the table, there will always be the attempt to squeeze you in that cookie cutter scheme, right? And so you receive feedback accordingly. I have been told as a junior engineer, you know, that I didn't really look like a boss. So if I wanted to progress on my leadership journey, I would have had to smile less, to use less my hands when I speak, and learn to put on a poker face because I use every single muscle of my face when I speak, and you know, people understand what I think. So had I followed this type of advice, which corresponds to a very stereotype image of, you know, a suit and tie type of boss, I would have probably undermined what I believe are my strengths.
Yeah.
So, yes, there's a lot going on which could derail you. You need to learn to cope and ignore. Of course, always knowing where the line is, because if certain comments become, you know, go over what you believe the line is, then you just need to make it clear this is too much. You know, like someone introducing you to the team as our new gorgeous chief engineer. Yeah, okay, thank you. And, you know, I'm here for something else. You know, comments on the fact that you get things done very quickly, very efficiently, just because you have long black hair. No, that goes beyond the line. So please, can we agree? It was a joke, okay? Can we please agree that, you know, I will not hear these type of comments again in a meeting, you know? So you need to know where the line is, but a lot of it is learning, yes, how to cope with it, flying higher than much of what you will see and hear, and yeah, what you will be exposed to. But that's why we have that accountability, Shini, because either our shoulders are broad enough or our skin is thick enough to really pave that way for many, many more to follow, which have different attitudes, features, behaviors.
I mean, when I listen to you, I'm thinking of my own situation. Sorry, that sounds really selfish, but you're talking about your experiences, and I'm thinking, yes, I've had that situation too. And the thing is, all the women that will listen to this conversation will have their own individual situations. And it just boils down to one thing: seeing you speak gives me permission to own my own story. And I think my audience seeing you speak will give them permission to own their own story. Because, you know, here we are today, 2022, and I often think about how in my 20s, I kept apologizing for looking the way I did and having the kinds of qualifications and expertise that I had, and feeling bad that I had that combination, and downplaying one or the other just so that I didn't shine too brightly or whatever it is. And I see you shining there, and I'm like, I will never do that again, because I see you just glowing with your expertise, your intelligence, your external packaging. And I'm like, she's celebrating who she is and not apologizing for all of her gifts and qualities. I'm not going to do that anymore. And this is why sort of women supporting women is just so crucial, because it's not even that, you know, I need to get advice from you. I mean, I would love to talk to you for hours, but we don't have that kind of time available. But it's just seeing you exist that is enough to just go, you know what, it's so beautiful seeing someone thrive. I've got to allow myself to do the same and stop downplaying aspects of us, because as women, we just bring so much. You know, I hear what you're saying about, you know, at some point you said, I don't know how you phrased it, but I was thinking, yeah, ego. We deal a lot. Yes, when you were talking about people having to prove they're smart, you know, in STEM worlds, which is kind of the only world I know, there is a lot of ego proving, you know, and I love this idea of not taking things personally, because, well, it's just so hard. It's so hard to not take things personally. And hearing you say, just don't do it. You know, instead of me saying, but it's hard, it's like, but it's possible, because I see you doing it.
And I'm not saying it's a walk in the park, you know. I mean, of course, I get angry, I cry, I get frustrated, you know, and then you elaborate things and you move on. That's the important thing. Continue moving on relentlessly and shine the light on others, to lift others. That's why it's so important also to go out there and talk to girls, to young women, to show them, you know, you can be a scientist and wear high heels. Yes, you can. You can do ballet and be an engineer. It fits. Just bring your own self to the game, because that's what you will need to thrive, no matter which path you choose. And don't let anyone tell you what you should not be doing or how you should be looking.
Yeah.
So
I think that's what it is. A lot of girls, women, they doubt themselves a lot. There's a lot of, you know, the most basic example is if you're in a maths class and the teacher's asked you a question and you know the answer, but you don't want to get it wrong, so you don't put your hand up. But we should be putting our hands up and saying, you know, very stoically, this is me, this is what I represent, and I'm not going to apologize for that. You know, I see you doing that, and I thank you, because I think maybe, well, I hope you're aware of what you represent for all women who have been given gifts in life, and, you know, bringing out the best in ourselves, you know, and letting ourselves shine, I think is really the key message that I have got from speaking with you today. I really don't want to leave our conversation, but our time is running out. Is there anything, you know, you must have mentored women and are still mentoring and given so much advice to everyone in your industry. Is there anything really significant that people need to know from your experiences in order to empower them?
You know, as I mentioned earlier on, I got a lot of advice along my journey, which I really couldn't do much with. So I'm always very careful when giving recommendations. But hey, I think, you know, what's really fundamental is that whatever you do, you put your heart in it. Follow your heart. Of course, your brain, your guts, your courage, but don't be afraid of following also what your heart is pointing you to. And there is so much place for heart in STEM. We are really, if you want to have an impact, if you want to change the world in a better place, there's no better field to be in. There's no more rewarding path for you. So study, be accomplished technically, be passionate about what you do, and don't forget that it's all about interaction with human beings. So yes, let's not forget that to cable ourselves for human interactions, which are a fundamental part of getting awesome science, technology, and engineering done.
Well, Grazia, I really feel the passion and actually the warmth and the love you have for the industry, for innovation, for advancement of technology, but also for the evolution of people and their skills and their expertise. You embody all of that, and you're a shining example. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. And I hope we stay connected, because you truly are a guiding light for me. So thank you.
Thank you for having me, Sheely, and we absolutely will keep in touch. We need to do this again.